Welcome back to another Cardinals Off Day podcast. We have gotten past the trade deadline, and we're still here, and I am back. I'm Ben Godar, one of your hosts. Last week, I was nearly Wally-pipped by Dan Chibnall, another member of our team, but I have forced myself back onto the field of play, and am here, as always, with my good friend Ben Humphrey. Ben, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Welcome back. It's good to see you. I suppose the good thing about you being out of town on work is that you didn't have to watch the St. Louis Cardinals play baseball very often.
That is true. I was too busy to do that, and as I would check in, didn't seem like I missed a whole lot. But I really did enjoy listening to you and Dan chat last week. So thank you, and thanks to Dan for doing that. It was kind of bummed, especially to miss the trade deadline episode, as in a season like this, that's kind of like one of the sort of few inflection points potentially. But that kind of leads us into we sort of we usually kick off with what have we learned, and I think the big thing we all learned was the trade deadline and everything that happened there. And Ben, you and Dan spoke about it, but it was kind of the Cardinals hadn't finished all their moves as you guys recorded, so I thought it might be a place for us to start off. So do you want to go first, or do you want me to chime in? I thought maybe just kind of what were our thoughts overall?
No, they got with the Helsley trade with the Mets, they got like 3 A-ball prospects, which felt like kind of the type of trade we would be dealing with, where the new regime, the Bloom regime, identifies younger players that they want their player development folks to get their hands on and mold into players who can probably help the big league team in 2 or 3 years. And then I feel like with Blaze Jordan, we have the new Dr. Thunder, because it was like, not that Matt's was worth a lot, but I was shocked that they got a AAA bat who is right-handed, who kind of plays third base and plays first base, but his bat doesn't really profile as an actual first baseman. And I didn't like that trade at all. And it doesn't make any sense to me, because I just you look at the organizational depth chart, and you have Wilson Contreras, who's under contract for a couple more years. You have a guy in Blaze Jordan who's going to have to be on the 40-man. You have Sajaci, who has more positional flexibility. You have Nolan Arenado. You have J.J. Weatherholt. They're going to be playing third base. Gorman could, or DH. And then Brendan Donovan, frankly, could play some third base as well. And then Ivan Herrera is probably a first baseman in waiting, although they're trying him in left field. And it just felt like they just threw another log on the corner infield log jam with that trade. And I didn't really like it. And then they returned back to form. I thought the Rangers trade was the type, profiled similar to the Helsley trade. And so that was kind of my takeaway, is the Mats. I didn't expect them to get a lot for Mats. It just seems like they just created a 40-man headache for themselves with this acquisition. And I know Bloom drafted him, etc., but I just look at him and I'm like, really? You couldn't just get an A-ball righty who throws 94 that maybe you can turn into something?
Yeah.
It seemed a little weird to me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a whole lot to say about these trades, because I just don't, these are not players that I was familiar with before, the trades happened. And I kind of feel like unless you're getting top 100 prospects who are pretty well documented, there's real sort of industry agreement on this is the type of player, this is. Once you get beyond that, I feel like you're really in the weeds, and we kind of just don't know. So the optimistic part of me can always think, there's someone in the Cardinals analysis and player development who sees more in these players than maybe they've shown, right? Or
Yeah.
sees kind of something from them. And that often does happen. That definitely can happen. But oftentimes it doesn't, right? you know, so that's where I just kind of throw my hands up a little bit on it. There was nobody here that was like, any kind of a superstar prospect. For just whatever context it's worth, the Helsley trade, the Jesus Baez, MLB Pipeline slotted him in as the Cardinals' number 6 prospect. Once they acquired him, and I know like Keith Law in particular, like just shit on him like I've never seen him shit on
It was
a
pretty
prospect
brutal,
before.
yeah.
It was pretty brutal. But reading other things, it's like there's some like exit velocity and things there that are pretty impressive, and he's like 20. You know what I mean? So like there's tools there, so I can think to myself, oh well, maybe the Cardinals see the tools there and they feel like, well, we have the way to move this guy forward or something. But he's slotted in there. Nate Dome, who was one of the pitchers they got in that Helsley trade. He was somewhere in the top 20, like maybe 15, I think it looks like. And Blaze Jordan ended up slotting in at 18, and then everybody else they got was somewhere below the Cardinals' top 20. So just for context, for what it's worth, that's the kind of guys that they brought in. Which, it's nothing real earth shaking. I feel like it's hard to evaluate because as much as we don't necessarily know about these guys, like I see people say things like, well, they should have gotten more for Helsley, and it's like, well, I don't know. I mean, like,
Yeah.
did they not call everybody? Like, like it's possible that this is the best offers that were out there. And I mean, it makes sense to me. I mean, we've watched Helsley pitch this year, and Helsley's a very good pitcher. His value obviously peaked last year, as we've talked about. This year he basically can't use his fastball anymore. He's only throwing the slider, right? So even as good as his 2 pitches are, when he's down to like one really good pitch, it's not the same kind of value proposition. So if teams have seen that and they're just not optimistic that that's going to change, it makes sense that they would approach it more like we're trading for like a 7th inning guy than we're trading for like a lockdown closer kind of guy or something. So
it was really interesting, that Helsley trade, the way that the teams that are in contention have basically, Tony La Russa always talked about shortening the game with the closer, and like the Mets and the Padres, it's like they're like stacking closers so that they can go pull that starter in the 5th, if need be, and just but I think to your point, like they traded relief pitcher rentals. These, right. There is just as much a likelihood that they're going to be terrible as they're going to be great, and then somewhere in between, like, is where they most likely will be. But it's, we're talking about 2 months, if they make the postseason, 3 months of a reliever. And, that's not a huge value proposition. And so I'm not terribly surprised that the return wasn't greater. But like, just the Blaze Jordan thing, I was like, really? And I think part of the reason is, Ben, you and I, we live in a AAA town. We have seen more than our share of quadruple A first base tweeners come through town, and I'm just like, really? Another Rico Washington? Like, what's going on here?
I will asterisk it by saying he is only 22.
That's true.
A lot of these guys, it's the like 25, 26, 27-year-old, right-handed AAA first basemen that, suddenly are, have a, OPS approaching 1,000, and people are like eye popping. It's like, no, that's, don't be impressed by that. They've just, they've been around long enough that they can do that. and we're gonna get to all the questions in just a minute. But one question that related really directly to this conversation we're having right here, Cole Morris from Blue Sky asked, "Are any of the prospects going to end up being worth the value that was given up for them?" And Ben, I mean, one way to look at that is like, the Cardinals decided we're not going to be a playoff team this year. So to some extent, these guys had no value for them, right?
Yeah.
Even when these guys wash out, it's like, you could be like, well, I wish they had, maybe found other guys who could produce more, but none of these guys were going to be on the team next year. Or, I mean, they were all at least going to go to free agency where they're going anyway. So I don't see that as being a concern. I don't know about you.
No, this was, you are gambling. You are taking these chips and putting them on these prospects and hoping that you get contributions from those players in the future. And
Yeah.
I think from the Helsley trade they will likely get that contribution. I think it's possible
Yeah.
from the Maton trade as well. And so each of these guys is a relief pitcher on an expiring contract, and
Yeah.
that's not a lot of value.
Yeah.
And also, they
Yeah.
saved the DeWitts a lot of money.
Yeah.
Millions of dollars. I mean, we're probably looking at what, like 6, 7 million, probably around in there, in terms of
Uh,
prorated salary they don't have to pay.
Yeah, yeah, I don't know. I get, to be honest, I don't remember. I didn't look real closely at the, picking up of salaries or anything like that there from the money. But regardless, I'm sure the DeWitts will pass any savings they get on to us. So um, we'll see. But it's like everything else with it's like drafts and trades of these really young players in baseball. It's like we want to not analyze them when they happen, and it's like, well, in 3 to 5 years, we'll let you know.
Yeah.
Like that's the point where we'll start to have any kind of clarity on these things. So anyway, circle back with us in 3 to 5 years. I guess we could kind of segue on into the questions we have, and we have another question that is kind of trade related. Tom Early from Blue Sky asks, "Are you filled with dread that the Cards rebuild, seemingly scheduled to reach its zenith in 2027, will be spoiled by a lockout? Also, I'd love just a general farm report reflecting the additions from the deadline. Did Tink Hence develop gigantism? Why are three of our top prospects catchers?" So, kind of two separate questions there, Ben. So, the first question, how concerned are you about the lockout and how that fits into this? And then just any kind of general thoughts on the farm system. And I'll let you tackle those in whatever order you would like.
Well, I'll start with labor relations. I am worried that we're going to lose at least part of the 2027 season to a lockout, because it really seems like the owners are going to make a push for a salary cap. And of course, Manfred is making the tour around to the major league clubhouses, and apparently was being a little bit of a weasel and refusing to directly answer a question about salary cap. And then reportedly, Bryce Harper said, if you want to talk about a salary cap, get the F out of our clubhouse. And I don't know if you saw that report, but I found that very funny. And only Manfred would go in there and think that he could. And I say this, we're from Iowa. We have a lot of politicians come through here. We all have watched politicians say words in response to a question that do not answer the question, but kind of do. And it never goes over well. So I can only imagine Manfred, who's not skilled in that way, trying to talk in that way to players who know what he is talking about, and it not going well. And this is just kind of like a little microcosm of, the pot is boiling, and I
Yeah.
think the water's going to boil over into some labor strife here within the next couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, those that are closer to this definitely seem to think that there's a high likelihood of that. So we'll see. I think it certainly could happen. in some ways, part of me feels like, I agree. At this point, it's hard for me to imagine the 2026 Cardinals being particularly competitive. It does feel like 2027 is
Yeah.
maybe where things are kind of like, lining up. So I understand the question on that, but also like, if that's the beginning of, if you want to call it a competitive window for the Cardinals, that's probably not as bad as some team that's like, this is the last year that this like veteran core is together. That feels like where,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It would really feel like you would really regret, a lost season. But even if there's some strife, I feel like an entire lost season feels, pro, you know, probably unlikely. As opposed to just part of it. So, it's one of those things where if you get at least part of the season in, I suppose you still get to, have your season or have your championship if you're going to get there.
Unless you are the Montreal Expos.
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
joking,
Yeah. Well,
but
um, well, and then to the second part of the question, just kind of about a general kind of, farm system report. And we just kind of mentioned, where these new guys slot in. And I, I haven't looked at any time recently on any of the like, where do the experts rank the Cardinals minor league system, and that's always a little bit of a fraught kind of thing anyway. But I mean, I think the system to me seems kind of good, not great. Obviously they're not. The best systems are often like teams that have been really bad for some time and have kind of stockpiled.
yep.
Like the Reds pipeline is now kind of pumped into the major leagues. Like some of those guys. So if you rewind like 2-3 years, that Reds system was like loaded. Coming off of a really long period of being pretty bad. But the Cardinals. I mean, obviously you've got Weatherholt, you've got a pretty legit, kind of superstar, potentially down there. You've got enough other kind of solid-ish guys, so I feel like it's okay. The catcher thing is kind of funny, and that feels like that's just kind of a like, that they just have so much like, so many catchers, but anymore I think that really you should teams essentially only draft shortstops and catchers and like maybe
Yeah.
center fielders, right?
Yeah.
Like, and because it's basically the same way that you pretty much only draft starting pitchers, because a lot of them are going to eventually slide their way down into the bullpen, and it's the same way you draft all these shortstops. JJ Weatherholt is probably, he may play some shortstop early in his major league career, but I don't think anyone expects he's going to be a career major league shortstop. These guys kind of find their way somewhere else, and I think that's largely the case with these guys there. Reynel Rodriguez in particular, they I feel like they've all but said, yeah, just like this guy's a hitter, and so like, they keep him listed at catcher right now. He's 18 years old. Like they're gonna, but he's hitting his way out of catcher. He's
Yeah.
kind of, I don't know. Any other thoughts you had just on the kind of system in general?
I think it's very top heavy. Like when you see the rankings and it's top heavy from these recent drafts where, you mentioned Weatherholt, now they have Doyle. I think those are two guys that you can count on being big leaguers probably
Mm-hmm.
with the Cardinals for, 6 years, 7 years.
Yeah.
And those are very valuable players to have, and that's very good, and that's the joy of drafting high. And we've also though lived through the downside of that. But I think they have been hit as an organization in terms of prospect by the pitching injuries and questionable pitcher health. Like Tink Hence, what is he? Quinn Matthews had that little hiccup early in the year, and now Tech Roby is getting Tommy John and won't be back till 2027, I believe. And so,
Yeah.
like those, that to me, that's really the question of what is this organization? Well, what are those three guys right now? That takes you from this top heavy, maybe like, I don't know, like 15 to 10, like in there maybe ranking. But if those guys pop and have really good years, then suddenly it's probably a top 10 organization, and you can probably wish on a solid homegrown starting rotation, um, for the next 5 years, 6 years.
Yeah.
And so that is the thing, though. There's no such thing as a pitching prospect, as the old saying goes, and the reason is because of health. And
Yeah.
so, how do you value those guys, and what will their health be? And that remains to be seen.
So
And then the catchers, I'm with you, Ben. Like, they're not all knocking on the majors door. They aren't ready for the major league clubhouse yet. But if I were Pedro Pajes, I would be pretty worried, because I think he might be sliding into the role he's destined for as a backup catcher who catches 35% of the innings.
yeah. Well, Ben, why don't we just jump at? We'll skip a question then because we had another question from Guth Sports. Right along these lines, he asked he said in the last pod you all mentioned, why are we still seeing Pajes if the run production is so bad? I'm wondering what are the Cardinals going to do at catcher? Not this year, but when will we ever have a true starting catcher? Um, do you want to take that?
Well, I think it's probably going to be Crooks. Would be my guess, but this is also the situation where that we are in, where it's after Yadier Molina. Well, who's the next Yadier Molina? No one is the next Yadier Molina. Like, that is a once in a generation player, and I think that we need to adjust accordingly. But you even just look at, like, the Dodgers. They have had good catchers come through, but they're pretty quick to cycle through them. And the Cardinals did that as well. After Pujols left for the Angels, they had good players come through, but they didn't have that face of the franchise type, come up to replace Pujols. But they were able to produce players and fill needs at multiple positions internally at a comfortably above average rate, and that was good. And so, when you look at catcher in particular, I don't know that any organization will ever have a Yadier Molina again, because I feel like more and more teams are going to the timeshare model, where
Yep.
it's the backup is playing more than the backup used to play. And we've
Yep.
talked about this with the Los Angeles Dodgers across the board, how, now that they have Otani, it's a little bit of a different animal, but they weren't they didn't have a lineup where you gave everyone 600 plate appearances. They
Yeah.
were they
Well,
they were flexible in that way, and I think that's kind of where the game is going.
it is, and ironically, that I mean, Will Smith is one of the like most starting catchers
Yeah,
there is. I remember we looked at this a few weeks back, but he's still like he only plays like I don't remember the exact number, but it was like 75% or so of the games at catcher, and I know he plays some DH and stuff too. So but I mean, I want to say he played like around like 130 games a season or something
yeah,
like that. And he's probably at this, and in fact, we even looked at. I mean, he's really kind of like at the top of the heap, really, in terms of like durability and just the volume that they look for him. Because yeah, you're exactly right. There's the teams do go to a split. The Cardinals are really, I think, in a pretty comfortable place here. Crooks is at AAA. I wonder if Crooks might not come up this season, and get his feet wet. Bernal has, most agree is the better prospect. He's younger, but he's at Double A.
yeah,
I don't see them bringing him to the majors this year because catcher is just hard enough.
yeah.
Like they want these guys to have time kind of at each level, and there's just so much they have to kind of get their arms around. But so Bernal might be more of a but perhaps even next season. But regardless, I think we seem like we might not be too far away from having a Jimmy Crooks Leonardo Bernal uh, tandem, which there's reason to think that could be a pretty good catching tandem. Those are both pretty good prospects there essentially. So yeah. So anyway, I think we've got that to look forward to. All right.
Our next question comes from Mink River via Blue Sky. Have we seen the last of Nolan Arenado on the field in a Cardinals uniform? Yes, he's been dealing with shoulder issues this season, but the timing of his IL stint feels like it may be the end.
Um, I don't know, Ben. I understand the question, and I think there's a possibility of that. But if I had to guess, I would actually say no. I don't think we've seen the end of him in a Cardinals uniform. And to be honest, I don't even think we've seen the end of him this season. I think he had an injury. I think likely he was probably pushing to keep playing, longer than maybe, he should have, in hopes that he would demonstrate enough talent to get traded. But that hasn't happened now. So he's on the IL. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a longer IL stint than maybe is absolutely necessary to kind of give him some rest because there's no need to bring him back. But it doesn't sound like the kind of an injury that I would expect for him to miss an entire half a season. I don't think he would want to do that because he wants to play and he wants to show that he's a good player. So there's at least a possibility of a trade down the road. But he's just definitely like his production and his contract are kind of going in a direction that I think a trade is just less and less likely. So I think he's likely around. That's my take on it anyway. Ben, what do you think?
I agree with you. I've seen some people like, oh, they're going to DFA him and this, that, and the other. I think that you can't look at his production and assign that to a healthy Nolan Arenado when he's gone on the IL and they're reporting he's been playing through shoulder trouble. And when you
Yeah,
play baseball with an injured shoulder, it is very difficult to hit and field with
yeah,
that. And so like his numbers are not good. I think he was at an 84, 85 weighted runs created plus, so 15, 16 percentage points below average, which is terrible.
right.
Um,
But they really fell off over the
yes,
last like month
yes,
and a half, which coincides with when he was playing hurt. So I still believe his true talent level is closer to what we saw those first couple
yeah.
months
I
of the
think he's
season.
like a league average-ish hitter,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
with his glove, that's a valuable player to have. Not so much if you're not trying to win the pennant or whatever, or make the postseason, whatever the phrase we use
right.
nowadays in this expanded playoff format. Um, but
Mm-hmm.
I also don't think that Bill DeWitt is the type of person to just like release or DFA a future Hall of Famer. Like he's just not, and
Yeah,
he shouldn't be.
no,
Even though it
yeah,
is a problem because they need to play other players and see what they have. Um, but this whole the route the organization has taken, it's just a mess, and I think it's just going to continue to be that way. Where he is with the Cardinals because, frankly, he doesn't want to go anywhere else that wants him, and so
yeah,
when you have a no trade clause and you decide to exercise that right, which is his prerogative, I don't blame him at all. But that's where he is, and the Cardinals agreed to take on that contract with that provision in it. And, might I add, give him another year. So instead of next year being the last year of the contract, it's the year after. So, that's where we are, and I think he's probably going to be a Cardinal through the end of that deal.
I do too, and I don't think it's really a big problem either. I feel like we got into a weird place with this because obviously he wanted to be traded, and then of course Mo, in a rare moment of candor, which I'm sure he regrets, said out loud that that was priority one, right? Was to make
One,
that
two, and
trade
three.
happen. So, and two and three. So the fact that it didn't happen, I understand where people are like, "Oh my gosh, what a disaster! It didn't happen." But as you said, I think we both feel like his true talent level is still in that like league average-ish level, and importantly, he's still playing good, not great, but good defense there as well. So like that's not a player that it's a problem to
No.
have on your roster. And we've talked to, he had a really interesting contract structure where his salary actually decreases in these final 2 years. Like his last year, it's like, $17 million or something. I mean, that's what like guys are getting for like 1 year free agent deals. That's not much more than that now. So like, it's just I don't think it's that much of a problem. You say, well, oh, he's blocking up path, he's blocking opportunity. Like, I don't know, kind of a little bit, but has anybody that was potentially going to capitalize on that opportunity really shown us that they, deserve to be better than that? I mean, like, is Nolan Gorman a better player than Nolan Arenado is right now? I haven't seen it.
Well,
So
but it's more a question of are any of those players, um, going to be better next year or the year after? Because now is the time you want to make that down payment in playing time. Like Victor Scott II has a
yeah,
similarly poor batting line and better defense, and I
yeah,
think the Cardinals will be better off next year and the year after that for allowing him a full year in the majors, even though he's hitting at that level. And so
yeah, yeah,
I don't know if Nolan Gorman is the answer, but that's the problem. Is like the organization. It seems like Oliver Marmol has seen enough. I should say that, but we don't know if Bloom and his lieutenants have seen enough to make that judgment.
yeah, yeah. All right. Last question. The Wallet Inspector, who likes to hit us up with complex questions, often with a wrestling angle, and we have that happening here as well. It says, as the season runs out, the expectation of a 40-man makeover loom. The pod has an affinity for the golden years of WWF. I think we can own that, Ben. I think that's a fair point that
Yes.
he's making right there. And a field at large lends to an easy Royal Rumble parallel. Not wanting to monopolize the entire pod with an order of elimination, could you guys give me your two Santino Morellis, as in one, who's the guy you see as out the fastest, and two, who's the guy that's still there against all odds and logic? And I like this. I like thinking about who's going to stick around on this club in Royal Rumble terms. Ben, anywhere you want to go with that? How do you see some of these guys, potentially sticking around or potentially being eliminated? And again, please phrase your answer in the form of a Royal Rumble analogy.
Well, first of all, for our listeners who do not follow professional wrestling, the Royal Rumble is the battle royale where the match starts with two wrestlers in the ring. And the object is to throw other wrestlers over the top rope so they hit the floor and then they're eliminated. And every so often, a new wrestler runs in. And so you'll have, you could have two guys in, you could have 10, and they go as long as it takes. And I think Ric Flair probably has what I would call the greatest Royal Rumble performance in history, for my money, when he won the Royal Rumble in the early 90s. And so, with that 40-man question, I think that Lucan Baker is already gone since this question was received.
Yes.
So he is the early one to be eliminated, and I think he would have been
Yeah.
my pick anyway because of his lack of positional
Yeah.
flexibility. Ben, who
Mm-hmm.
would you identify anyone else you think will be quickly eliminated here in the weeks to come?
Yeah, it's a good question, and um, I, I I honestly don't know that I know, because I feel like the sort of Bloom camp has to have some guys that they're looking to shed. And I'm kind of setting aside like the Jose Fermins and the guys that are just like organizational depth anyway. I'm kind of just trying to. I'm thinking more about just who are some of these players who they we're going to try to give some runway to. For a lot of this season, I kept saying Burleson, Burleson, Burleson because the no defensive position, what had been terrible splits, but his splits have really improved this year, and his batting line is so much better. I think I think Burleson is gonna hang around for a good half the Rumble. Maybe hacksaw Jim Duggan style. That was the first wrestler I thought of as I thought of Burleson there. Um, yeah, I'm gonna be honest. I feel like Gorman or Walker are gonna go. I don't know why. Like they don't play the same position, but I just kind of feel like um, I feel like there's gonna be one of those guys who the Bloom regime just does not believe in, and they're gonna be gone this off season because I think part of the problem is they're both guys who the team is kind of trying to get them like full-time playing time to give them like all of that runway, and neither one has really shown the ability to realize that. So I think one of those guys, their time is going to be up, but I couldn't necessarily tell you which one. That's where my head goes first. I don't know, Ben. Are there others you're thinking of?
Michael Ciani. Um,
Well, Michael Ciani sucks. He's been in AAA. I don't,
well, but
I said Jose Fermin. Jose Fermin's at least
well,
played in
that's
the
what I
major leagues
mean.
this
Like
year.
he hits
Yeah, yeah,
right-handed. Like you
yeah,
can kind of
yeah.
understand why you keep him around. Like if they need a 40-man spot, like Michael Ciani is the guy who's being shown the
That's fair.
door.
I guess the question was 40 man. I was really zooming in on like I was thinking of it more as like these kind of runway guys that we think might be like core kind of players. But you're right. The question was more 40 man. Well, yeah, isn't Matt Koperniak
Yes,
still on
he
the 40 man
is,
roster?
and he seems
I mean,
like
has he?
someone who probably won't be on there very long either.
Yeah, yeah, um, yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think it, yeah, well, I mean, we love Yoho Pozo, but and he's hitting much better than Pajes, but I still think I don't see Yoho Pozo being on this team next year. So I think Pozo's going to have a really grand entrance. Maybe make a couple great moves in the ring, but then I see him being body slammed to the mat
So
by Jimmy Crooks. No.
uh, I was just kind of thinking, like in a way, Bloom is kind of the Undertaker here. Like he's gonna clear the ring. Like there's gonna
Yeah,
be like six guys in there, and then the lights go out, and then that's
yeah,
that's the end of that. Um,
yeah,
but it's when you look at the kind of the filler on this 40 man, like Hampson is uh
oh yeah.
he's not long for it either. um
Hmm.
and relievers, who even knows, like but I think I would
Yeah,
actually like to say that Miles Michaelis, his days are numbered, Ben. He, he is going to be eliminated soon because his contract is going to expire, and good
yep,
riddance to bad rubbish is what I say to that when that day comes. I think that they're
yep.
probably going to, with roster expansions, probably I think they'll have to create some space, and I don't think Michaelis will go in that wave. I think he'll play out through the end of the year because
Hmm.
they need the innings, and they don't. We've talked about the health questions. I don't know if they promote Matthews for some starts or not. Like I'm just not sure what approach they will take with the rotation.
Yeah, I think it's going to be just really dependent on. I mean, he had the injury, and then he was just bad for a good month after the injury, and he had been a little bad before like he was probably pitching hurt a little bit before that. But I know at least his last game, maybe his last couple games, he looked kind of more himself. The thing for him has been his walks have just been out of control this year, but that also that just really speaks to injury. Like a guy who didn't walk a ton of guys just suddenly walking guys, that definitely suggests that. But I would think if he pitches, we're just here at the beginning of August. If he has a run of starts in the month of August that are kind of in line with the type of pitcher they think he is, I definitely think there's a good chance that he would come up and pitch in September, because to kind of get his feet wet and help them understand a little bit more of what they have, going into next year. So, but yeah, no, I mean, look, there's plenty of room to clear on this 40-man roster. Like, I don't think they're going to have trouble finding space for guys on there, and honestly, I feel like we just, as we talk about this organization, have had this weird thing. I know, not to pick on Derek Gould, but he's the one that happened to post this the other day, something about when when Newt Barr came off the injured list and talked about it being like a lineup challenge again for Ali Marmol, and I kind of thought, I don't think it's a challenge because all of these guys suck, right? We have this that I just think if people from other organizations could hear the way Cardinals fans talk about well, where are they going to find playing time for just this whole litany of guys that are just a tick above replacement level, you know what I'm saying? These and that's the problem, is there's a lot of guys that are at that level, but very few that are kind of pushing their way above that.
Well, and I'm just kind of tired of the media being like, poor Oliver Marmol, he has to do his job. It's just yeah, this is what you signed up for. I don't feel sorry for you. You need to do your job and help these players develop as well.
Yeah. I also, frankly, I don't believe that he's really, I mean, I know he's setting the lineup a little bit, but I think he's given some very dark lines to color within. So I don't think I buy the premise that he's the one out there
totally
deciding, well, how much playing time does Jordan Walker get versus how much playing time does Lars Nootbaar or Victor Scott get. Yeah, on a given day he might decide, well, this guy needs rest or whatever, but he's got some pretty firm guidelines as to where our priorities are, and he's executing that. So Ben, let's just to wrap this up, who wins this particular Royal Rumble?
You mean who stays on the 40-man the longest of all the players currently on it? I mean, don't you have to go with?
No, I don't think I mean that. I mean, if this 40-man was a Royal Rumble this
oh, they were actually wrestling
season. They were well, no, not actually wrestling, but I'm using this as a metaphor, and what I'm thinking is, and I really hope I'm not spoiling anything here for folks, but the WWE is scripted, and so the Royal Rumble winner
is not
who
scripted.
They really kind of
what? No, okay.
All right, we'll talk. We'll talk about this offline. But the Royal Rumble always kind of shows you oh, here's somebody they're going to give a big push to, right? In fact, a lot of times this is the person who's going to be the challenger at WrestleMania for the big title, etc. So thinking of it in those terms, who is the guy on this roster that the Cardinals see doing that? Who are they going to give a push to?
I think it's Jordan Walker, because he had a very, very, very bad start, and he's been better. And I think, he's almost like Roman Reigns. They're going to push him, even if maybe it's not quite there. So I hope he succeeds. I'm really pulling for him. But man, when he smokes a line drive into the gap, it's just it is off of his bat in a way that the Cardinals haven't had a guy who does something like that since probably a young Pujols. Even Matt Holliday wasn't doing what he does to the right center field gap, where it'll be a liner that's 10 feet off the ground that gets to the wall in 2 hops and is just a rocket. and you can just see it there. And I'm probably still holding on to that, um, but I'm thinking it's probably him, and I'm wondering if he's able to take advantage of it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I see where you're going there. I was gonna go with either Mason
Oh
Wynn,
yeah,
who I think is like like you know, if not the best player on this team, the most long-term player on this team. Like this guy is, legit gonna be here, like until he reaches free agency. But the other guy, and this is to me the one guy who has really stepped forward this season, is Avon
yeah,
Herrera. And so I could see Avon Herrera kind of being that too. And honestly, as we were talking about Jordan Walker, like smoking a ball like no one else, I was like, who else really
yeah,
smokes the ball and does it more
yes.
often and in the air. Yeah.
But
Anyway,
but
I don't know.
Mason Wynn is
Interesting.
probably like the answer, right? Like, a shortstop who wears bling and has style and charisma, like he's the heartbreak kid, like of the St. Louis
Mm-hmm.
Cardinals. And I've had questions like about his offensive production, and I'm like, you aren't asking someone who was born and raised on Ozzie Smith if a guy who
Right.
can hit like league average with the best shortstop defense in baseball is a core player. Like, guys, what are we
Yeah.
doing here? That's a core player if
Yeah.
ever there was one. And we should
Yeah.
be thankful that he's in the organization and is as entertaining as he is, because it's a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah. Agreed. 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 All right. Well, if the Cardinals do happen to host a Royal Rumble, we'll definitely be there. Actually, a friend of mine went to a minor league game somewhere in Illinois the other day, Ben, and they had some wrestling after the minor league game, and I thought that's such an amazing like
Yeah.
combination. Why don't they do that more often? Because the minor league baseball and wrestling are both all about living the
Yep.
gimmick, right? And so I just feel like that's
Yes,
a perfect
absolutely.
pairing. So anyway, if they happen to have an actual Royal Rumble, of course we'll be back to talk with you about that. But we don't know that's happening anytime soon. So Ben, as we look ahead to what might actually happen, what are you looking for?
Well, I am going to be watching JJ Weatherholt. And the reason I'm going to be doing that, we actually had a text thread about this, so I can't do it as a quiz for you, which in retrospect I should have done. But it would have been, player A in 79, in his first 79 AAA plate appearances, hit 361, 418, 681 for a 448 weighted on base average, or a 160 weighted runs created plus. And then, we can do player B, 73 plate, his first 73 plate appearances, 344, 425, 754, 487 weighted on base average for a 193 weighted runs created plus. And player B is Weatherholt. Player A is Dylan Carlson. So the Cardinals, and then 2020 was a weird year, but the Cardinals totally looked at Dylan Carlson's, month or 6 weeks in AAA and saw that as reason to, put him on the squad for the weird COVID season. And I'm interested to see if Weatherholt hits his way onto the roster for September call-ups this year, because he's got another month. And everyone, you look at that line and you're like, look how well he's hitting, we should call him up. But I think the mark of whether or not a guy is ready is how he responds to a little downturn in AAA, because the metrics and the data are reaching downward, and so teams are going to figure out how to try different things against him, and try to exploit those, I think. And so in the next few weeks, I'm interested to see how much his batting line falls back down to earth and what that means for September call-ups.
Ben, asking if Weatherholt's batting line falls back down to earth would suggest that it ever was at earth, which it has not been throughout his professional career. That's the thing that's just amazed me about him, and it's a short time, right? It's this season, but even like Dylan Carlson, and I actually even pulled up Dylan Carlson's like minor league stuff here, and I mean, he hit above 100, weighted runs created plus at each level, but not always like a lot, a ton above. He had like a 105, 115, So, Weatherholt at the two levels he's been at has just like obliterated them, and there's just there has not been like any kind of a dip, which is I think pretty exciting, but it's also kind of it's a short window, and of course when you're comparing him to Dylan Carlson, you got to remember Dylan Carlson was a high school draftee, so like those first 2-3 seasons of Dylan Carlson's minor league career, that's what Weatherholt was doing in college. So yeah, no, it's still a good comparison, and I think we're all probably going to be looking at Weatherholt for sure. I think I'm kind of looking at that, and really what I'm overall looking at is when will there be some moves that I really feel like are like Heim Bloom moves? I'm just so curious to kind of see those and how they manifest. I think we all know that, like, I think he's part of the conversation. All suggestions are like it's not like there's not like conflict there, right? I think they are kind of like working
definitely
as a team, like everyone understands everyone's role, right? But just naturally, and I think Mo even said this at Blogger Day when we were there, as the season goes on, he's gonna have a larger voice, just in that like more decisions are gonna have more to do with the coming years, right? And so I just kind of thought about like, well, what will that look like? What would maybe that be? And frankly, I don't think we'll really know, because Mo was also looking to next year at this point too, right? So in a lot of cases, I think they would make the same kind of moves. And I know I did see someone on social media, I think, suggested that the Luken Baker move was the start of Heim Bloom cleaning house. Like, I don't think that was quite the case. I think the 28-year-old right-handed first baseman was a pretty easy. We're moving on from him, but but I think things like Matthews and Weatherholt will be really interesting. Like, do these guys see some major league time this year? Because if they do, it's really all about thinking about what their role is next year. And I think when teams do that, I think what it lets them do is roll into spring training more confident that, like, potentially, if you have a guy like Weatherholt come up and he like holds his own, I think you go through your offseason, you roll into spring training thinking like, this guy is our second baseman, or this guy is our kind of multi-position utility guy, but like this guy is on the team, and this, his piece. And same with like Matthews. If Matthews comes up, has a run of starts, and is, competitive, I think you probably roll in, you think, okay, Matthews is our, whatever it is, that being number 3, number 4, whatever kind of, starter. Whereas if they haven't pitched in the majors, it's a little more tentative, in the coming year, and you kind of feel like, well, we probably have to backfill a little bit, because even if they're long term we don't have much doubt. And I think in the case of Weatherholt, they have no doubt that long term, he's a major leaguer. Again, like Mike Trout didn't stick around in his first like call up, right? Like, it's just not, a lot of guys don't, and that doesn't mean that they're not ready for it. But this kind of helps you maybe see if they're ready for it and roll into next season knowing that. So those would be some moves that I would maybe kind of feel like, okay, these are, whether they're Heim Bloom moves, they're at least moves that are really telling us something about next year, which I think will be interesting. So, Ben, anything else before we wrap it up today?
No. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I think the remainder of the season is going to be fun to watch in its own, even though the stakes aren't going to be that high. I think we're going to get kind of a window into how the organization is looking at certain players and what their future under the Bloom regime might look like. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how Oliver Marmol is making decisions with the bullpen. and then also how the organization is making decisions with who is getting those opportunities at the major league level over the final months of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think myself and probably many fans may not watch as closely the tail end of this season because there's not as much of that sort of competitive question. But, we just had a really great sunny gray start, and the team beat the Dodgers, and there's still going to be some really good games and good performances, so definitely something we can all look forward to, and we'll be back with you for that. So thanks as always to Devont for the music, to Dan for hanging out with us on social media, and we're going to be back. Our next off day is August 14th, and we will see you then on the next Cardinals off day.
Go Cards!